HOA Cynthia kept using Jamal Brooks's hose, so he hooked it up to a sewage tank. What would you do if your new neighbor kept stealing from you? Drop by drop, Jamal Brooks thought he had moved into a quiet, peaceful neighborhood. But when his water bill mysteriously skyrocketed, he discovered a shocking betrayal just across the hedge. The culprit, Cynthia Holloway, the self-appointed queen of the block, who thought his garden hose was hers to use. But Jamal wasn't about to stay silent. What followed next was a battle of wits, petty revenge, and a final twist so outrageous, it literally stank. Stick around because you won't believe how one man turned sewage into sweet poetic justice. The summer heat, yet so cool in suburban Houston, Texas, was relentless. As the sun blazed down, Jamal Brooks sat on his front porch enjoying the faint breeze that cut through the otherwise stifling air. The hum of cicadas filled the silence, blending with the low murmur of distant lawn mowers and neighbors tending to their yards. Everything felt peaceful, until he noticed something strange. It began with a drip. At first it was barely noticeable, a soft patter that seemed to come from nowhere. He shrugged it off, assuming it was just the usual noises of the neighborhood. But the next night as he lay in bed, the drip became more persistent, more deliberate. It sounded like water, and it was coming from the direction of his garden hose. Jamal Brooks had a good memory for details, and it didn't take long for him to realize something was off. His water bill had been higher than usual this month, but he hadn't thought much of it. Perhaps an extra load of laundry or his weekend binge on garden sprinklers. But the mysterious drip now gnawed at him, making him uneasy. Was someone using his water? His garden hose, a thick green coil that stretched lazily across his front lawn, sat under the streetlight like an old friend. The bright, bulbous light from above cast shadows that danced on the ground, making the scene eerily unfamiliar. The hose had never been used much except for the occasional task of watering his lawn or rinsing down the driveway, but now it seemed to be calling out, for attention. Something was going on. The rattling noise continued that night, louder than before. It echoed through the neighborhood, bouncing off the wooden fences and brick walls of nearby houses. Jamal Brooks could hear it even with his windows closed, the strange metallic sound of water rushing through the hose. Whoever was doing this wasn't being subtle. He bolted upright in bed, his mind racing. He grabbed his phone and checked the water meter. The numbers were climbing steadily. The unmistakable realization hit him. Someone had been siphoning his water, stealing from him without his consent. It was a small thing, perhaps, but a violation all the same. The next morning, Jamal Brooks stood in his driveway, a mug of coffee in one hand, and his eyes scanning the area. His first thought was to approach the neighbors to ask if they had seen anything suspicious, but he didn't want to come off as the paranoid, grumpy neighbor yet. As he stood there staring at the hose that lay innocently across the lawn, he knew something had to be done. The sound of a car engine rumbled in the distance. A sleek SUV slowly pulled up across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the harsh morning sunlight. The driver's door opened with a soft click, and out stepped a woman in a white cardigan and beige pants. Her name was Cynthia Holloway, and she had only recently moved in next door. Jamal Brooks had yet to properly meet her, but he'd seen her around. Mara always carried an air of self-importance, as though she owned the entire block. It wasn't just the way she dressed, her smug smile, the way she walked with her head held high. It was something deeper, something intangible. She was the unofficial HO liaison, as she had introduced herself to the other neighbors, which to Jamal Brooks sounded more like a title she had given herself than an actual responsibility. He watched her from the corner of his eye as she stepped out of her car and strove towards her front door. She didn't acknowledge him, and not even with a wave. Instead, she gave her SUV a quick glance before disappearing inside. Jamal Brooks's eyes narrowed. It was only a hunch, but something about the situation felt off. He had a strange suspicion that Mara, with her pristine, perfect lawn and ostentatious air of authority, there might be the one behind the mysterious water usage. The thought annoyed him, but he didn't act on it immediately. Instead, he turned back towards his front porch and sipped his coffee, his mind swirling with possibilities. The day had just begun, and he knew the story was far from over. Jamal Brooks couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. For the past couple of days, he'd been keeping a watchful eye on his garden hose, waiting for something or someone to explain the sudden spike in his water bill. He had no concrete proof, but he suspected his new neighbor Cynthia Holloway was behind it. He didn't know why he felt so certain, but something about her smug, self-assured demeanor made him uneasy. Her presence seemed like a quiet storm, ready to unleash. It was a Tuesday morning when he finally decided to confront her. He'd seen her pull out of her driveway and head toward the grocery store, which gave him the perfect window to inspect his property and perhaps gather some evidence. The rattling sound of the hose was gone, but Jamal Brooks's suspicions still lingered. He walked to the edge of his lawn where the hose sat coiled and untouched. His gaze drifted to the faint trail of wet spots that marred the gravel driveway. Someone had definitely used it recently. The wetness wasn't from the sprinklers, nor was it from the light rainstorm that had passed through the previous evening. The marks led directly from the street to his garden, and Jamal Brooks could only imagine what had been done. But he needed answers, not assumptions. With a determined stride, he made his way across the yard and knocked on Mara's door. It was the first time he had ever directly interacted with her, and the thought of confronting her felt strange, almost foreign. But he had a right to know who was using his water, and he wasn't going to let this issue fester any longer. After a few moments, the door swung open. Mara stood in the frame, a bright smile on her face. She was the picture of suburban perfection. Blonde hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, fresh face, with a hint of makeup, and a white blouse that contrasted against the soft beige of her front door. Good morning, Shaq," she said, as if she had been expecting him. "How can I help you today?" And Jamal Brooks was taken back by her overly pleasant tone, which didn't match the growing tension in his chest. He didn't return her smile, choosing instead to cut straight to the point. "I noticed something strange, Mara," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I've been getting these ridiculous water bills. And when I went outside this morning, I found some wet marks on my driveway. Looks like someone's been using my hose without asking." Mara's smile faltered just for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and she folded her arms across her chest, a passive-aggressive gesture that immediately set Jamal Brooks on edge. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Shaq," she replied, her voice light but laced with a hint of defensiveness. "We're neighbors, right? Everything here is shared. It's all part of building a community." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into that trademark smile. "You should think of it as a way to foster goodwill." Jamal Brooks blinked, his eyebrows furrowing as confusion spread across his face. Shared. Was she seriously suggesting that she could just take his water without permission because they lived next to each other? He could feel the blood rushing to his face as the irritation bubbled up, but he forced himself to remain calm. If he let her see how angry he was, it would only make matters worse. I don't think that's how it works, Cynthia Holloway," he said, slowly trying to keep his voice steady. "I pay for my water just like everyone else. And if you needed it, you could have asked. But instead, you've been taking it whenever you felt like it, without saying a word." Her smile faded into a tight, almost forced expression. She glanced away for a moment, then met his eyes again. Look, Shaq, I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, her tone softer now. "But it's not a big deal, is it? I'm sure we could figure something out." Jamal Brooks shook his head. "No, it's a big deal, Mara. It's about respect. You can't just assume you have the right to use my things. That's not how neighbors should treat each other." The tension in the air was palpable. Mara's eyes flickered briefly to the side, and Jamal Brooks saw something that made his stomach churn, a flash of annoyance, a subtle flicker of the true person she was hiding behind her neighborly facade. She didn't like being challenged, especially not in front of someone who clearly saw through her act. Well, if it's that big of a deal to you," she said, her tone shifting back to that insufferable smugness. "Maybe you should have put up a sign or something. We're all trying to live in harmony here, but not everyone thinks like you do." Before Jamal Brooks could respond, Mara slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing there on the porch fuming. It wasn't just the disrespect. She had dismissed his concerns as if they didn't matter, all while hiding behind a veil of condescension. He turned on his heel, frustration swirling within him. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As he walked back to his own porch, he found himself grappling with a mixture of emotions: anger, confusion, disbelief, and something darker, a sense of betrayal. For all the sweet words, for all the talk about community, Mara had only shown him one thing. She was entitled, and she believed she could do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. Jamal Brooks wasn't about to let her get away with it. No, he needed proof. Solid proof that she was the one stealing his water, and he wasn't going to stop until he had it. The sun was setting in the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Jamal Brooks stood in his driveway, staring at the faint footprints on his freshly paved cement. He wasn't sure how long they'd been there, but the telltale signs were hard to ignore. Wet paw prints and soap residue scattered in small patches. It was the same pattern he'd noticed a few days ago when he had inspected the area near his garden hose. He had already figured out that something wasn't right, but this was the final clue he needed. Mara had been using his water again, but this time it seemed a little more intentional, almost as if she were flaunting it. It was one thing to catch her in the act once, perhaps an honest mistake, but this felt like a message. She wasn't just borrowing his hose anymore. She was making herself at home with it. Jamal Brooks bent down to inspect the residue closer. The soap marks were distinct, and they led right up to the driveway where her shiny silver SUV had parked just earlier in the day. The footprints, they were unmistakably from a dog, one of those large muscular retrievers, likely Cynthia Holloway's. It was all starting to come together, but something didn't sit right with him. He had known for a while that Mara was the type of person who would cross boundaries and act like everything was community property. But seeing the proof right there in his own driveway hit him differently. It wasn't just that she had used his water, and it was the fact that she had done so repeatedly and without even the courtesy of asking. The hose had turned into a tool for her convenience, while Jamal Brooks was left footing the bill. He ran his fingers through his hair, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate choice on her part. She had to be stopped. That night, Jamal Brooks decided he'd had enough. He couldn't let it go on any longer without confronting her again. But he needed a way to make sure that this time there was no mistaking who the culprit was. No more doubts, no more ambiguous evidence. He needed something solid, something that would force her to acknowledge her actions. The next morning, as he drank his coffee on the porch, he came up with a plan. He would install a motion-activated security camera, the kind that could capture any movement near his garden hose. It would be subtle, hidden in plain sight. Yeah, he didn't want to escalate things right away, but he was tired of being made a fool. He wasn't about to let Mara continue this petty theft in the dead of night without consequences. Jamal Brooks headed to the local hardware store, carefully selecting the most inconspicuous camera he could find. After some tinkering with the setup, he placed the camera inside a small birdhouse perched on the fence that separated his property from Mara's. The birdhouse was old, weathered, and looked like it had been there for years. No one would think to look inside. It was perfect. The camera had an excellent range and could pick up motion from the driveway to his garden, ensuring that any activity near his hose would be captured. After he finished setting everything up, he returned to his porch, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The waiting game had begun. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jamal Brooks settled into his living room, his eyes glued to the small screen of his tablet. He had connected the camera feed to his device, eager to see if Marlowe would fall for the trap. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he knew that something would eventually happen. His instincts had been spot on before, and he wasn't about to doubt them now. Hours passed without any sign of movement. The neighborhood was quiet, save for the occasional dog barking in the distance. Jamal Brooks stifled a yawn, thinking that maybe he was overreacting. Maybe Mara had gotten the message. Maybe she'd let go without the childish behavior. But then, just after midnight, he saw it. A figure appeared on the screen, moving cautiously in the dim glow of the streetlights. It was her Mara. She walked down her driveway wearing fuzzy slippers and in a long robe. The camera picked up the distinctive click of her shoes as she stepped lightly onto the grass. Jamal Brooks couldn't help but watch in stunned silence as she approached the garden hose. His eyes narrowed as Cynthia Holloway bent down and twisted the nozzle. Within moments, the sound of water flowing through the hose filled the quiet night. She was watering her plants again, but what happened next caught him completely off guard. Mara started to sway her hips as she watered the garden, moving in time to an imaginary beat. And it wasn't just the strange sight of her dancing barefoot in the grass at nearly 1:00 a.m. It was the utter lack of self-awareness, the complete disregard for the fact that she was stealing someone else's water. It was almost absurd. She didn't even care that she was being filmed. It was as though the world revolved around her. No one could challenge her. No one could stop her. She was in her mind the queen of the neighborhood, above reproach and above consequences. Jamal Brooks stifled a chuckle, feeling a mixture of amusement and frustration. He knew what he had to do. It was time to let the community in on the secret. The video he had just captured would speak volumes. It was clear evidence that Mara had been using his water without his permission. He couldn't just let her get away with it anymore. The next morning, Jamal Brooks uploaded the footage to the neighborhood forum, titling it, "Guess Who Thinks She Owns My Hose?" The video showing Mara and her fuzzy slippers happily dancing around with the hose was clear enough that no one could deny it. It was like watching a prank unfold in real time, a moment of ridiculousness that everyone would love to see. Within minutes, the comment section exploded. People were tagging each other, sharing the video, laughing at Mara's antics. Some of the comments were downright savage. Memes, GIFs, and sarcastic jokes flooded the forum. The neighborhood was in an uproar, and Jamal Brooks couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. Mara, of course, didn't take it well. She quickly posted a comment of her own, trying to justify her actions. "That hose is community property," she wrote, her tone defensive and thinly veiled with frustration. "We're all neighbors here. You should be more generous with your resources." But her attempt to deflect only made matters worse. People weren't buying it. The more she tried to explain herself, the more she dug herself into a hole. Jamal Brooks leaned back in his chair, watching the comments pile up. It was only a matter of time before Mara would have to face the music. The chaos in the neighborhood forum grew by the hour. Jamal Brooks watched from his living room as post after post piled up beneath a video he had uploaded. What had started as a simple attempt to expose Cynthia Holloway's antics had quickly transformed into a viral spectacle. Everyone in the neighborhood, and a few outsiders too, were now tuned in, eagerly commenting, sharing, and laughing at Mara's expense. But while Jamal Brooks felt a sense of satisfaction, his quiet suspicion now backed by undeniable proof. He knew Marlo wouldn't back down easily. She was the kind of person who would never admit she was wrong. Her pride was too big for that, so he wasn't about to rest on his laurels just yet. No, he had to be smarter than this. He needed to be prepared for her retaliation, and he needed a way to ensure that the community saw the truth, not just his word. Marlo was bound to come up with some excuse or counterattack, and when she did, he wanted to be ready. She was already showing signs of cracking under the pressure, but the last thing he wanted was for her to try and turn the tables, claiming that the video had been fabricated or misinterpreted. He wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Nah. That afternoon, Jamal Brooks decided to take matters into his own hands once again. He had a plan. It wasn't just about embarrassing her anymore. It was about making sure she understood that actions have consequences. But for that, he needed to make sure there was no room for doubt. The first step was to install a hidden camera in a safer, less obvious location. Mara had proven time and again that she wasn't above using his property for her own gain, so he was going to ensure that there was no wiggle room this time. His first camera, while effective, had been too easy to overlook. The birdhouse was a decent cover, but not foolproof. If she figured out that it was recording her, it could all come crashing down. The second camera, however, was going to be perfect. He had it placed just under the edge of his porch, nestled into the plants. It could easily record anyone who came within a few feet of his front yard without raising suspicion. The angle was spot on, and no one would ever notice it. The last thing he wanted was for Mara to realize he was watching her every move. When everything was set up, Big Shack leaned back, taking a deep breath. This was the moment where he would see if his plan would work. But no sooner had he finished than his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a new notification on the neighborhood forum. It was from Mara. Her comment was short, but the passive-aggressive tone was unmistakable. "I'm so glad to see that you have all the time in the world to focus on trivial matters. I, on the other hand, have much more important things to do. You should really reconsider how you're handling this situation." Jamal Brooks couldn't help but laugh. She was trying to downplay the situation, pretending it was all some kind of silly misunderstanding. But he wasn't buying it. He was done playing nice. It was time to escalate things even further. Within minutes, the neighborhood forum erupted with reactions. People were mocking Mara's comment, poking fun at her for trying to avoid responsibility. They were now fully on Jamal Brooks's side, and it was clear that Mara's reputation was quickly spiraling into ruin. The more she tried to salvage her image, the more she dug herself into a deeper hole. Mara wasn't the type to give up easily, though. That evening, she posted a lengthy rant on the forum accusing Jamal Brooks of violating her privacy. She claimed that it was illegal to film someone without their consent and threatened to report him to the HOA. Her post was full of indignation, as if she were the real victim here. Jamal Brooks read urges over her words, a smirk forming on his face. She didn't get it. She had crossed the line. Now she was trying to spin the situation in her favor. But what she didn't know was that he had already taken the precaution of recording her actions, and not just in the garden. The next morning, when he checked his camera feed, he saw the same old routine. Marlowe was back at it, sneaking out to use his hose this time under the cover of darkness. She moved quickly, her face hidden by the shadows, but the unmistakable sound of the hose turning on filled the silent night. The footage was clear, and she was guilty as charged. There was no denying it now. With the footage in hand, Jamal Brooks felt a rush of confidence. This was the final nail in the coffin. He was going to make sure everyone saw the truth. Especially the HOA. He had proof, solid, irrefutable proof, that Marlowe was taking his water without permission. The next step was to turn the tables on her completely. Instead of just posting the footage for all to see, he decided to take a more direct approach. He forwarded the video to the HOA, along with a polite but firm email. "Dear HOA members," the email began, I hope this message finds you well. I would like to bring to your attention an ongoing issue I've had with my neighbor, in Cynthia Holloway, who has been using my water without my permission. Attached is a video that clearly shows her actions. I trust the HOA will handle this matter accordingly." He hit send and leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of triumph. He had done what he needed to do. He was done playing games with Mara. Let her try and talk her way out of this one. It wasn't long before he received a response from the HOA. The email was short and to the point, acknowledging the situation and assuring him that they would take appropriate action. Jamal Brooks smiled to himself. The wheels of justice were in motion, and Marlowe's attempts at deflecting blame were crumbling beneath her. But Jamal Brooks wasn't done yet. He knew that this story would have an impact on the entire neighborhood. The next step was to make sure everyone knew what had happened. And with that, he decided to make the video at HOA public. Again. This time he would post it to the community Facebook page where it would spread like wildfire. The backlash would be swift, and there was no way Mara could escape it. Jamal Brooks couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as he stared at his phone screen. The email he had sent to the HOA was now in their hands, and he had made sure they knew exactly what Marlowe was up to. But that wasn't enough. He knew the power of social media, the way it could amplify a situation or turn it into a spectacle that could reach far beyond the confines of his quiet suburban street. Cynthia Holloway had tried to dismiss his concerns, played the victim card, and denied any wrongdoing. Now it was time to let the whole world see what kind of person she truly was. He wasn't just exposing her. He was exposing the hypocrisy and entitlement that had driven her to act the way she had. It was time for the neighborhood to see the truth, and it was time for Mara to face the consequences of her actions. Jamal Brooks sat back on his couch, scrolling through his neighborhood's Facebook page. He was already a member, and he knew that the community page had become the place where everyone aired their grievances, shared gossip, and posted all the latest news about what was going on around the block. It was the perfect platform for his next move. He clicked on the post button, his fingers pausing for a moment as he thought about how to word it. After all, this wasn't just a simple complaint. It was a full-on expose. He wanted the message to be clear, to cut through the noise and grab the attention of every single person on the block. So after a moment's thought, he typed, "Guess who thinks she owns my hose?" He attached the now infamous video, the one that had captured Marlon and her fuzzy slippers, dancing and watering her garden at 1 a.m. with his garden hose. He added a brief description. Caught red-handed using someone else's water without permission is one thing, but doing it in the middle of the night with zero regard for the consequences, well, that's just a whole new level of entitlement. Watch the video and judge for yourself. Within seconds of hitting post, and the comments began flooding in. At first, they were simple reactions. Laughing emojis, shocked faces, and posts like, "No way, this is ridiculous." But as the video continued to circulate, the tone started to shift. People began commenting more seriously. The reaction wasn't just amusement. It was disgust. The neighborhood had never seen anything quite like this, and they were all too eager to jump in and voice their opinions. "Can't believe she did this. I thought we were all neighbors, but this is beyond disrespectful. Who does this lady think she is, stealing someone else's water and then acting like it's no big deal? Unbelievable. Yeah, we've all got our problems, but this is a whole new level of entitlement. Shock props to you for calling her out." By the time Mara saw the post, the damage had already been done. It was clear that her reputation in the neighborhood was on the line. She'd been too arrogant, too dismissive of Jamal Brooks's concerns, and now she was paying the price for her behavior. Mara, ever the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, wasn't going to let this slide. She posted a furious reply almost immediately. "This is an invasion of my privacy. I've been living here for less than a year, and this is how I get treated. Someone should be ashamed of themselves for recording me without consent. And for the record, that hose was shared. Not once did anyone say I couldn't use it." But the response didn't go over well. More comments flooded in, and each one seemed to chip away at Mara's carefully crafted image. Shared, who made that rule? The only thing shared around here is the crazy amount of judgment you're getting now. Maybe if you asked first, none of this would have happened. You're still trying to defend yourself. The evidence is right there. It's clear you were taking Shaq's water for your own benefit. And then there was the inevitable meme. Someone had taken a screenshot from the video, added a caption, "The Queen of Theft," and it spread across the page like wildfire. Memes, GIFs, and photoshopped images of Mara as a queen of filth began popping up everywhere. People were having fun with it, making light of the situation, but beneath the humor, it was clear that no one was buying her excuses. Jamal Brooks sat back, feeling a mixture of vindication and disbelief. He had known that Mara's response would be defensive, but the sheer level of backpedaling and refusal to admit she had done anything wrong was almost laughable. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, each comment and meme making her look more ridiculous than the last. As the hours passed, the post reached even more people. Neighbors who had never met Mara or Big Shire were chiming in, asking questions, offering support, and sharing their own opinions on the matter. Some even confessed to having their own run-ins with Mara, who had always tried to manipulate situations in her favor. The floodgates were opening, and there was no going back for her. Then came the next wave of posts. People began discussing the water usage laws, property rights, and the responsibilities of homeowners. Many were now rallying behind Jamal Brooks, offering to help him resolve the situation and suggesting that Mara be reported to the HOA, the city, or even the local authorities if she kept up with this behavior. It was clear that Mara had underestimated just how much her actions would affect her. She had underestimated the power of a community coming together to protect its members from someone who thought they could get away with anything the neighbors had seen through her facade. Now they weren't going to let her off easy. Cynthia Holloway's reply to the post was nothing more than a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control. "This is getting out of hand. I'm not going to sit here and let someone make a spectacle of me." She typed her words, dripping with frustration. But it was too late. The backlash had already become a tidal wave. Jamal Brooks had struck the first blow, and now Marlowe was paying the price for her entitlement. Jamal Brooks, feeling the weight of the moment, took a deep breath and smiled. The community had spoken. He had taken the high road, exposing Cynthia Holloway's behavior with undeniable evidence and letting the public react. The truth was out there now, and there was no escaping it. The next morning, Jamal Brooks woke up to an avalanche of notifications. His phone buzzed relentlessly, every ping a reminder of how his decision to expose Mara's misuse of his water had set off a chain reaction in the neighborhood. He had known it would make waves, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer scale of the backlash. It was now the talk of the entire neighborhood, and beyond that, the larger community seemed to have caught wind of the drama. The memes and gifts mocking Mara as the Queen of Filth had spread like wildfire. People were getting creative, photoshopping her face onto royalty portraits, adding captions like the Queen of Stolen Hoses. It was all in good fun, until it wasn't. Mara had been quiet for the first few hours after the post went up. But as the backlash snowballed, she could no longer sit idly by. Her reputation was in free fall, and she had to act quickly to salvage what was left. That's when she struck back. Jamal Brooks had been sipping his coffee on the front porch when he saw a notification from the neighborhood forum. Mara had posted a new comment. He clicked it immediately, bracing for whatever excuse or explanation she was about to serve up. Her post was longer this time, and the tone was markedly different. Gone was the casual defensiveness. Now it was pure indignation. "This is, outrageous," she wrote. "I can't believe I'm being targeted like this. I don't deserve to be dragged through the mud over something so trivial. Someone needs to remind Shaq that it's illegal to film people without their consent. I never thought a neighbor would stoop so low. It's an invasion of privacy, and I will be reporting him to the HOA. I'm the victim here, not him." The post was a masterpiece of misdirection designed to make everyone believe she was the one being wronged. She played the victim card hard, twisting the truth to suit her narrative. To her, it didn't matter that she had been caught red-handed. It was all about shifting blame and manipulating the situation. Jamal Brooks couldn't help but chuckle. The audacity of it. She was so focused on her own narrative that she seemed blind to the fact that everyone could see through her. Her attempt to paint herself as the innocent party was almost comical. Almost. But, he knew this wasn't over. Mara wasn't just going to back down after one post. Not when her reputation and her perceived control over the neighborhood was at stake. No, she was going to fight back with everything she had. And now it seemed her weapon of choice was the legal threat. Jamal Brooks wasn't intimidated. He had anticipated this move. After all, Marlo wasn't the type to take things lying down. She wasn't going to let a little public humiliation stop her from trying to regain control. But he wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. He had one final move up his sleeve. Jamal Brooks's first instinct was to go back to the camera footage, the one he had caught Mara using his hose under cover of darkness. That footage was gold. But now that she had gone on the offensive, he knew he had to turn the tables once more. He wasn't just going to let her use the privacy card to deflect attention from the truth. He decided to take the footage to the HOA. This time, he wasn't just going to email them. He was going to show up in person. Later that afternoon, Jamal Brooks knocked on the door of the HOA president, a man named Alan Green, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years. Donald Avery had always seemed like a reasonable guy, and Jamal Brooks was counting on him to see things for what they were. When Donald Avery opened the door, Jamal Brooks was ready. He held up his phone showing the video of Marlo once again using the hose and dancing in the middle of the night. The footage was crystal clear. There was no mistaking it. Jamal Brooks didn't say a word at first, letting the video speak for itself. Donald Avery watched the entire clip without interruption. When it finished, he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a long breath and turned to Jamal Brooks. "Eshak," Donald Avery said slowly. "I've been in this neighborhood long enough to know that things don't usually escalate like this, but this is a different story. You've got the proof. I'm not blind. I'll make sure this is brought to the board. We'll handle it." Jamal Brooks felt a surge of relief. The footage had done its job. It had put everything into perspective. Mara had crossed a line, and now there was no way to ignore it. Donald Avery promised he would take the matter to the HOA meeting that evening, where they would discuss it and decide on next steps. Mara, on the other hand, wasn't going to let this go without a fight. Less than an hour later, she posted again on the neighborhood forum. This time, her post was even more defensive and angry than before. "I have been harassed by my neighbor, and now he's involving the HOA. This is ridiculous. The water hose was used in a spirit of community. If you all are going to side with someone who feels entitled to his own water, then I'm not sure I belong here anymore. You've made it clear who you want in this neighborhood. I will be contacting my attorney." The comment stirred the pot even more, but it didn't have the effect Mara was hoping for. Instead of rallying support, her words only alienated her further. More and more people in the neighborhood began chiming in, calling her out for her inability to take responsibility for her actions. Her repeated attempts to spin the situation in her favor were starting to look desperate. The HOA meeting that night was tense. When Jamal Brooks arrived, he could already sense the change in the atmosphere. Marlo wasn't there in person, but she had sent an email asking the HOA to review her claim of privacy invasion and threatening legal action. Donald Avery presented both sides: Jamal Brooks's footage, which was irrefutable, and Mara's argument that she had been unfairly filmed without consent. The board didn't waste any time in deciding. It was clear that Mara had violated the trust of the community. After some deliberation, the HOA issued a formal warning to Mara, advising her to cease using her neighbor's water and to refrain from any further inappropriate behavior. They also informed her that if there were any more issues, they would take more serious action, including involving local authorities. Jamal Brooks felt a sense of quiet triumph as the meeting concluded. Mara had been put in her place, and the neighborhood could finally begin to heal from the chaos she had caused. Back home, Jamal Brooks sat on his porch watching the sunset. He felt the cool breeze against his face, a gentle reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right required patience and a calm hand. He hadn't raised his voice or lost his temper. He had simply exposed the truth, and the truth had done the rest. It wasn't just about the water hose anymore. It was about standing up to entitlement, about holding people accountable for their actions, no matter how small they seemed. And in the end, it had been worth it. The days after the HOA meeting were quiet, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jamal Brooks had done what many in the neighborhood were too afraid to do. He'd exposed Mara's entitled behavior, forced the HOA to act, and ensured that the entire block knew what she had been up to. Yet as peaceful as things seemed on the surface, Jamal Brooks knew Mara wasn't the type to accept defeat so easily. Cynthia Holloway had always prided herself on being the queen of the neighborhood, the unofficial HOA liaison who could bend the rules to suit her needs. Now, with the HOA breathing down her neck and her reputation in tatters, she was cornered. And cornered animals, Jamal Brooks knew, were the most dangerous. That afternoon, as Jamal Brooks walked to his mailbox, he noticed something unusual. An envelope with no return address sitting neatly in the middle of his porch. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, and felt a sense of unease. It wasn't like Mara to directly address him in such a personal way, especially after everything that had transpired. He opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. The letter was short, but its message was clear. "You've made your point, but I hope you realize that it's not over. You've made yourself a target, and I don't take kindly to being embarrassed in front of my neighbors. Expect some consequences soon." Mara. Jamal Brooks read the note twice, his grip tightening around the paper. He wasn't surprised. It was exactly the kind of passive-aggressive move he had expected from Mara. Underhanded and full of spite, he felt his stomach tighten. Realized that this wasn't just an empty threat. Mara had already shown she was willing to use anything and everything to manipulate the situation in her favor. And now that she had been publicly humiliated, there was no telling how far she might go to retaliate. That night as he sat on his porch, the sunset casting long shadows across the yard, he felt a chill that wasn't just from the evening air. Something was brewing in the neighborhood, and Jamal Brooks knew it wouldn't be long before he saw the first signs of Mara's retaliation. The question was, what would she do next? The next few days were a mix of small annoyances and strange occurrences. It started with a few late-night disturbances. At first, it was just the sound of loud music blaring through the thin walls of his house, as if someone were throwing a party right next door. He rolled his eyes, knowing instantly who was behind it. It was Mara's signature move, a way to make him feel uncomfortable, to let him know she wasn't going down without a fight. At first, Jamal Brooks tried to ignore it. He assumed it was just a one-off, but then the music started up again the following night, this time even louder. He could hear the bass thumping through the walls of his home, the lyrics to some old rock song blasting through the speakers. It wasn't just loud, it was aggressive, as if she were trying to drown out the entire neighborhood. It didn't take long before he realized it wasn't a one-time thing. Each night without fail, Mara's music would start at an unreasonable hour, shaking the peace of the entire street. The last time it happened, Jamal Brooks had had enough. He got up, walked outside, and stood on his front porch, waiting. There she was, standing in her driveway, a smug look on her face, her stereo blasting away as if she didn't care who heard. Really, Jamal Brooks called out his voice, sharp. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she just smiled and waved. "Just a little music, Shaq. Don't be so uptight. We're all friends here, right?" Jamal Brooks clenched his fists, resisting the urge to storm over to her. He had to keep his cool. He wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing him lose his temper. Instead, he stood there, silently letting the music throb through the air until finally the stereo cut off with a sudden click. "Good night, Shaq," Mara said sweetly, almost mockingly, as she turned and went inside. But that wasn't the worst of it. The next day, Jamal Brooks noticed a few things. First, there was an anonymous parking ticket on his windshield. It was a bogus violation. One of those fake tickets people sometimes put on cars to mess with others. His tires weren't even close to the curb, and he hadn't parked in a restricted zone. He knew it had to be Cynthia Holloway's doing. It was her way of trying to get under his skin. Then came the second ticket and the third, each one more ridiculous than the last. They were all from random places. improper parking, expired registration, even failure to display a valid permit, none of which applied. It was becoming clear that Marlo wasn't just trying to annoy him. She was actively trying to make his life difficult. He wasn't going to let her get away with it. After a few days of this passive-aggressive nonsense, Jamal Brooks knew it was time to take action. He wasn't going to be the one to escalate things further, but he wasn't going to sit back and let her get away with her petty tactics either. If Marlo wanted to play games, he was more than capable of outsmarting her. The next evening, Big Shot gathered his thoughts and came up with a plan. He had learned that Mara's most effective form of revenge had been subtle, a series of small inconveniences designed to slowly chip away at his patience. He would need to do the same. But he wouldn't sink to her level. His plan had to be clever, strategic, and precise. But first he needed to get her where it would hurt the most: her pride. A few days later, he saw his opportunity. Mara had just gotten home from work, stepping out of her SUV with that same air of superiority, the one that had been driving him mad from the beginning. As she reached for her front door, Jamal Brooks casually approached her driveway. He had been waiting for the right moment to do something to show her that while he could take the high road, he wasn't afraid to fight back. "Hey, Mara," he called out with a friendly smile. "You know, I've been thinking. You seem to be pretty active in the community, especially with all those complaints about me. I thought maybe I could return the favor and let everyone know what you've been up to." She froze for a second, a flicker of concern crossing her face before the mask returned. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice smooth, but the hint of panic was barely concealed. Just some things I've noticed. You know this late-night noise, the fake parking tickets. It's been pretty noticeable, Gree. Maybe the HOA would like to hear about it." Cynthia Holloway." His eyes narrowed, her facade cracking slightly. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed, stepping toward him. "Oh, I would." Jamal Brooks replied, his tone calm but resolute. "And if I were you, I'd start thinking about the next move carefully." Jamal Brooks had been calm for so long, and now he felt the pressure of the situation pushing him to do something drastic. He had tried everything he could to avoid conflict with Mara. He had attempted to reason with her, expose her petty thefts, even went through the legal channels, but nothing had worked. Mara just wasn't the type to back down. She'd made his life a living hell with petty stunts like loud music, fake parking tickets, and her passive-aggressive games. But this time, Jamal Brooks wasn't going to let it slide. He needed to end it. He wasn't about to let Mara turn his peaceful neighborhood into her own personal battlefield. Not when he had already done everything by the book. It was time to level the playing field. Jamal Brooks's mind began to work, calculating, plotting his next move. He wasn't about to escalate things into an all-out war. No, this wasn't about violence. It was about subtlety, about showing Mara that messing with him was a mistake she wouldn't soon forget. And he wasn't going to use water. No, that would be too easy. No. Jamal Brooks had something else in mind. He stood on his porch watching Mara as she walked past his house, humming an obnoxious tune to herself, no doubt proud of her latest victory over him. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to make the biggest mistake of all. Earlier that week, Jamal Brooks had gone to the local hardware store, purchasing a portable sewage tank that was small, inconspicuous, and capable of holding enough water to do some serious damage. It wasn't dangerous. It was in fact harmless. But to anyone who didn't know better, it looked disgusting. It looked like something no one would want to be caught in, let alone wear. Jamal Brooks's plan was simple. He had been secretly rerouting the water hose, the same one Marlo had been using, through the portable sewage tank. The tank itself was harmless. It was a small amount of water with a bit of harmless liquid mixed in. But once the water hit the hose, it would look foul, putrid, and beyond nasty. And this wasn't just about revenge. It was about giving Mara a taste of what it felt like to get hit with something that wasn't quite right. Something that wasn't clean and perfect like she always demanded. He'd already set up his camera again. This time focused on the spot where, Mara had so often come to borrow his water. The motion sensor was activated, and all Jamal Brooks needed was for her to make her move. The evening finally arrived. Jamal Brooks sat back in his recliner watching the video feed from his camera on his phone. The neighborhood was peaceful here. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the block. In the distance, he could hear the soft rustling of leaves, the occasional sound of a car driving by, and the hum of distant air conditioners. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then, just after dusk, the familiar sound of a car engine rumbled in the distance. Cynthia Holloway's SUV slowly pulled into her driveway, the headlights flickering as it came to a stop. Jamal Brooks could see her through his window stepping out of the car, her expression as smug and self-satisfied as ever. Tonight was the night. He watched as Marlo walked toward her garden heading straight for the hose. He could see the silhouette of her figure through the window as she bent down to turn the nozzle. Jamal Brooks's pulse quickened. This was it. With a steady hand, he pressed the button to start recording. Mara was in position. She didn't notice the subtle change in the hose's path. It was so cleverly hidden that it almost looked normal. But Big Shag knew what would happen next. Mara twisted the nozzle, and the water began to flow. For a brief moment, everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. The stream of water coming from the hose was suddenly darker, murkier, and noticeably foul-smelling. As Mara stood there watering her plants, she took no notice, humming to herself, completely oblivious to the fact that she was about to get drenched in something far worse than water. Then it happened. The first stream of water hit her, splashing across her front and upper chest. Mara froze. She took a step back, looking down at herself with a mix of confusion and disgust. What she didn't realize was that this wasn't just ordinary water. It was sewage water from the tank with a pungent odor that made even the bravest of people recoil. Her hands went to her face instinctively, but it was too late. The water continued to spray, soaking her robe, her slippers, and drenching her completely. The smell was overwhelming, and it didn't take long for her to realize what was happening. She let out a scream of horror, stumbling backward, trying to escape the mess that she had unwittingly created for herself. But she couldn't stop the water from coming. Jamal Brooks watched from his window, barely able to contain his laughter. The satisfaction in his chest was overwhelming. This was karma in its purest form, a calculated, perfect moment of poetic justice. Mara had spent days tormenting him with her passive-aggressive antics, but now she was getting a taste of what it felt like to be completely caught off guard. Mara's scream echoed her out through the neighborhood as she staggered around, her hands desperately trying to wipe the disgusting water from her face and clothes. She fumbled with the hose nozzle, attempting to turn it off, but the damage had already been done. Her hair was matted, her clothes ruined, and the foul smell hung in the air like a toxic cloud. At that moment, the camera caught her full reaction. She stood frozen, staring at the hose as if it had betrayed her, her face twisted in shock and anger. Jamal Brooks, still watching from his window, couldn't help but laugh out loud. He didn't need to do anything else. This was the ultimate payback, and the entire neighborhood would see it. After a few moments, Mara turned and bolted for her front door, leaving the hose lying there on the ground, still leaking the disgusting water. Jamal Brooks knew the video he had just captured would be the final nail in her coffin. It wasn't just about the water anymore. It was about showing her that no one, not even the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, could get away with her entitled behavior. As Mara disappeared into her house, Jamal Brooks stood up from his chair, his heart still racing from the adrenaline. He knew he had won. He didn't need to say anything more to her. He had taken his revenge, and in the process, he had made it clear that no one could mess with him without facing the consequences. The next morning, as the first light of dawn broke across the neighborhood, Jamal Brooks sat at his kitchen table staring at his phone. His hands shook slightly from the adrenaline of last night. He knew that Marlo's reaction to the sewage water had been caught perfectly on camera, but now it was time to make it public. He wasn't about to let her get away with pretending it had never happened. She needed to feel the full weight of her actions. Jamal Brooks wasn't the kind of person who liked to gloat, but there was something satisfying about knowing that the entire neighborhood and beyond was about to see exactly what kind of person Mara really was. He had planned this moment for weeks. Now it was time to upload the footage. He clicked the upload button, attaching the video of Mara's disgusting water shower to the neighborhood Facebook page. He typed a simple caption, "When you mess with the wrong neighbor. But karma is real," and hit post. As soon as the video went live, the reactions flooded in. The phone buzzed non-stop. Each notification a reminder that this wasn't just about getting back at Mara. It was about bringing justice to a community that, had silently endured her antics for far too long. Within minutes, people began sharing, the video. Some of the comments were from neighbors who had been following the whole debacle. Others were from people who had never even met Mara or Jamal Brooks but had heard about the chaos in the neighborhood. The tone was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive of Jamal Brooks. This is priceless. That's what you get when you mess with a wrong person. Go Shaq. Wow, that's some next-level karma right there. Never thought I'd see something like this happen in our neighborhood. She's been making life difficult for everyone for so long. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. Team Shaq. Jamal Brooks couldn't stop grinning as he read through the comments. The laughter, the memes, the gifs, everything was just pouring in. It was becoming clear that the whole community was reveling in Mara's misfortune, and people were even making jokes about how the Queen of Filth knew had finally gotten her just desserts. And the meme-making was in full force. Someone had photoshopped a crown on Mara's drenched head, calling her the Queen of Sewage. It was a roast that was gaining momentum, and it wasn't going to stop. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. The comment section exploded. Said Jamal Brooks's phone was blowing up with notifications from people not only in the neighborhood, but from people he didn't even know. His video had reached thousands, and the reaction was just as overwhelming as he had hoped. But Mara wasn't going to sit back and let this happen without a fight. She responded on the forum, of course, trying to spin the situation to her advantage. Once again, this is outrageous. I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but, this is an invasion of my privacy. I'm filing a lawsuit against Jamal Brooks for harassment, and I'll make sure the HOA deals with this accordingly. No one should have to be humiliated like this. The post was full of righteous indignation. Mara's tone was the same as it had been before, blaming everyone else for her mistakes, pretending Shia was the victim, but this time, no one was buying it. The backlash against her was swift, and the comments poured in. Good luck with that. Everyone saw what you did, and it was disgusting. Don't try and play the victim now. You're the one who's been harassing everyone in this neighborhood for months. Don't you think it's time you took responsibility for your actions? The more she tried to justify herself, the more ridiculous she sounded. She was spiraling, and the internet wasn't letting her off the hook. The neighbors had rallied around Jamal Brooks, and the tide had turned. Cynthia Holloway's arrogance, once so assured, was now becoming the thing that everyone mocked. She was no longer the queen, of the neighborhood. She was the punchline of a joke. And the joke was going viral. Even the local news caught wind of the story. Samantha Reed reached out to Jamal Brooks asking for an interview. Within hours, a brief segment aired on the evening news featuring clips of the video, accompanied by commentary about neighborhood dynamics karma and the perils of being an entitled neighbor. Mara's name was splashed across the headlines, and the entire neighborhood was getting its 15 minutes of fame. Jamal Brooks sat back and watched it all unfold. He knew that the situation had gone beyond just getting back at Mara. It had become a public spectacle. A moment of catharsis for everyone who had suffered from her manipulative tactics. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was united in a shared sense of justice. No one could deny that what had happened was satisfying on some deep, almost primal level. But it wasn't just the public humiliation that had changed things. The real shift was in the power dynamic. Mara had spent so long acting as though she owned the neighborhood, believing she could manipulate people with her false sense of entitlement. Now she was facing the consequences of her actions in the most public way possible. As the days passed, the ridicule intensified. Mara's social media profiles were flooded with memes and posts from people mocking her. If people even started using the hashtag #HashQueenOfFilth, flooding her with playful jabs and sarcastic praise. Her reputation, once so carefully constructed, was in ruins. Meanwhile, Jamal Brooks enjoyed a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done more than expose Mara's behavior. He had shown the entire neighborhood that standing up for what was right could lead to real change. Mara had overplayed her hand, thinking she could manipulate everyone around her without consequence. And now she was paying the price. By the end of the week, Mara had packed up and left the neighborhood, selling her house and moving out in a hurry. The signs of her former dominance were quickly fading, replaced by a renewed sense of peace in the neighborhood. The HOA had followed through with their warning, and though Marlon never officially responded to the HOA's final decision, everyone knew the truth. Jamal Brooks, meanwhile, returned to his peaceful routine. He watered his lawn without fear of anyone turning on his hose, and the community began to return to its usual rhythm. But one thing had changed. The neighbors now knew that if someone like Mara could be brought down, anyone could be held accountable for their actions. The sense of justice, of balance, had been restored. And as the dust settled, Jamal Brooks had only one thought running through his mind. If you mess with the wrong neighbor, karma always finds a way to make it right. The weeks following Mara's departure were some of the most peaceful Jamal Brooks had experienced in years. It was as though a weight had been lifted from the entire neighborhood. The sounds of late-night disturbances and the anxiety over her antics disappeared overnight. The simple joy of walking to the mailbox without a sense of dread became an everyday luxury. Jamal Brooks didn't boast about what he had done. He didn't walk around the block with his chest puffed out or revel in the satisfaction of his victory. Instead, he quietly enjoyed the newfound calm, returning to his routine with a renewed sense of peace. The neighbors had all been affected by Cynthia Holloway's behavior, each one taking a mental sigh of relief when she finally left. And in a way, the entire block had been united by their shared experience of her entitlement. But it was Jamal Brooks who had provided the courage to stand up for what was right. Every evening, Jamal Brooks still watered his lawn. He didn't need to check the hose anymore to make sure it was intact, and he certainly didn't have to worry about anyone else using it. It had become a ritual for him, something simple, something that symbolized his return to normalcy. He had, however, noticed that the neighborhood had changed in subtle ways. The neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now more willing to chat. There was a camaraderie in the air, an unspoken bond that came from watching someone take a stand. It was as if everyone had learned something from his quiet defiance. It wasn't just about calling out injustice, it was about restoring balance. One evening, as Jamal Brooks was finishing his watering, his neighbor across the street, Calvin Morris, waved him over. Calvin Morris had always been friendly, but lately he'd seemed more animated, like there was something he wanted to say. "Shaq," Calvin Morris called, a grin on his face. "I've got to hand it to you, man. What you did with Mara, it was something. I don't think anyone around here had the guts to stand up to her like that. We all knew she was a piece of work, but you took her down a notch." Jamal Brooks smiled and walked over. He had never wanted to be anyone's hero, but hearing Calvin Morris speak so genuinely made him realize how much of an impact his actions had really had on the neighborhood. "It wasn't just me, man," Jamal Brooks said, shrugging. "It was all of us. I just happened to be the one who pushed back, but it's nice to hear people say that. Honestly, I was just tired of seeing someone like that push everyone around." Calvin Morris nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And I've been thinking maybe it's time we started speaking up more, not just for ourselves, but for each other. Marlo's gone, but I don't want another person like her to take fruit around here." Big Shag nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. It's easy to let things slide when you're just trying to live your life, but sometimes you've got to fight for what's right." Calvin Morris clapped him on the back. Well, you're an inspiration, man. Maybe you should consider running for HOA president next year. He joked, though there was an edge of seriousness to his tone. Jamal Brooks laughed. No, I'm good. I've got enough on my plate keeping my grass green, but thanks for the offer. The two men laughed, and just as quickly as the conversation had started, it ended. They went back to their routines, but the weight of Calvin Morris' words hung in the air. Jamal Brooks had changed things not just for himself, but for the whole neighborhood. They were no longer living in fear of Mara's constant undermining her sense of entitlement and the manipulation she had brought with her. Things were different now. As the months passed, Jamal Brooks found himself reflecting on how everything had unfolded. He realized that standing up to Mara had been a much-needed reminder for everyone in the community. It was okay to draw a line in the sand to call out behavior that wasn't right and to demand respect for the space we all share. He hadn't set out to be a hero if he had simply wanted peace. But by taking that first step, he had helped create a lasting change. One evening, as the sun set behind the houses and the familiar buzz of summer filled the air, Jamal Brooks found himself sitting on his porch, a cold drink in hand. The evening breeze was warm and comforting, a reminder that things were getting back to normal. He could hear the sounds of kids playing down the block, the murmur of friendly chatter from his neighbors' porches, and the faint rustle of trees in the wind. It was the kind of peace that felt earned, and in the quiet of the moment, Jamal Brooks allowed himself a small moment of pride that he had done the right thing not just for himself but for everyone around him. Sometimes it wasn't about confrontation or chaos. Sometimes it was simply about standing firm in your convictions, speaking up for what's right, and letting the universe take care of the rest. There would be no more drama, no more late-night confrontations. The garden hose was his peace was restored, and for the first time in a long while, Jamal Brooks felt truly at ease. Peace, finally, he murmured to himself with a smile. And as the neighborhood settled into its quiet evening rhythm, he knew one thing for sure. Karma had come right on. In a world where boundaries are too often ignored and entitlement goes unchecked, Jamal Brooks reminded us that quiet strength paired with clever resolve can restore balance in the most unexpected ways. This wasn't just about a hose or even about water. It was about dignity, about standing up when someone believes they're above respect, above rules, above you. And sometimes, karma doesn't whisper. It sprays back loud and clear. But now we want to hear from you. Was Jamal justified in what he did, or did he go too far? Have you ever had a neighbor who pushed you to your limit? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Stories 4, where real-life drama meets powerful lessons. Because sometimes, the smallest hose can unleash the biggest truth.